All right. Well, I'm going to break up this the narrative literature, of course, is a lot of sentences and a lot of verses. And I'm going to break it up a little bit as we go through this. We are in, according to this word today, we are in Babylon. And the title of my sermon today is Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. It's so fun to say it. I just had to make that the title. Of course, you know where we're going to end up going with that. But I wanted to start out with the experience for most all of us, I imagine, of reading or seeing some words on there that we don't know exactly what they mean. We might not know how to read them, and they might be, some of us have more of a clue than others, but we're looking at a language that is not ours, and we're trying to figure out what exactly it could mean for us. Well, it doesn't exactly mean weighed and found wanting and divided for you, but in some ways, something of the word today will mean something to you because the Holy Spirit is here and His word is here. So let's just see what He does with that. I'm going to begin reading and just read the first 4 verses today of this account. We are in Babylon. It is about 20 or so years after the events of chapter 4. That's where King Nebuchadnezzar was given the mind of a beast, and he ended up saved. He ended up following the Lord and worshiping God after quite a process. And at this point in the story, Nebuchadnezzar has died, and this is about 20 years later. So we're catching up, and I'll explain more as the story unfolds here. So beginning with verse 1. Belshazzar the king held a great feast for 1,000 of his nobles, and he was drinking wine in the presence of 1,000. And when Belshazzar tasted the wine, he gave orders to bring the gold and silver vessels which Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken out of the temple, which was in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles, his wives, his concubines might drink from them. Then they brought the gold vessels that had been taken out of the temple, the house of God, which was in Jerusalem. And the king and his nobles, his wives, and his concubines drank from them. They drank the wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone. So we start out this chapter with a feast, with a grand gathering. I'm going to do my best to explain to you why it's not just a big feast. There's a purpose behind it, but it's a feast. King Belshazzar has hosted this feast, and it is even in the midst of grave danger to his government and his country. They're in crisis. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But in the midst of a nation at crisis, he's holding a big party. That's 1,000 people and that show up for this big feast. There had been great instability over the last 26 years in the kingdom of Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar died 26 years ago. And they had been through 4 kings since that happened. It's like, when your church goes through 4 pastors in 7 years, you're kind of going, that's quite a transition. They had been through these kings. 2 of them his sons, I think. Might be a little mixed up on that. I think it's 2 sons of Nebuchadnezzar. They ended up killing each other. And a son-in-law who was the father of Belshazzar today. So when it says Belshazzar, his father is Nebuchadnezzar, he's his grandson, okay? He's his grandson. So they'd been through 3 sons, 1 son-in-law who married a daughter of Nebuchadnezzar, and then killed one of the sons and became the ruler of Babylon, and he had a son named Belshazzar. So that son is the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar. My point at the end of all of these strange names and everything is this was a very insecure and unstable government after the death of Nebuchadnezzar. He was the ultimate autocrat, Nebuchadnezzar. The world's never seen anything like him. He could lose his sanity for 7 years, and things basically kept rolling along because of the systems that he had set up. He was quite a leader and an amazing, as I said, autocrat. An autocrat is a person who doesn't just break laws to determine how his people are going to live. He makes new laws, and his word is law, okay? So he was really something else, and he got all that from God, too, which is pretty amazing. 26 years later, they are in a great crisis, though, with this king, Belshazzar. Why a feast? Why is he throwing a feast? You may have a picture in your head of like your teenage kids when you go to the beach for a weekend and what happens while you're gone, and which can end up being a strange kind of feast that takes place. We've had some strange feasts in the Garrett household, but that's not what we're talking about. Belshazzar is a king. He's the second king because the first king, his father, is still a king, only his father's not in the city of Babylon. So Belshazzar is taking care of Babylon. Why a feast? And it is in the midst of crisis. It's this: a king to the north of modern-day Persia named Cyrus has united the armies of the Persians and the Medes. Those are people who are in what is modern-day eastern Turkey, northern Syria and Iraq, southern Armenia, all the way up to Persia. So kind of up in that area, those are the Medes. And they have united their armies to rebel against the king and the government of Babylon. Okay? And they have moved south. And King gotta write it down here. Nabonidus, his father, has been defeated in battle about 40 miles north of Babylon by Cyrus and his forces. They've lost 2 major battles there, and Nabonidus has fled the field of battle to south of Babylon. And Belshazzar knows that. A tremendous army is descending on Babylon, and they are, by all practical, they're surrounded. The city is surrounded, and he's throwing a feast with 1,000 of his nobles. These are political leaders, military leaders. These are the I don't know what we would call them, the 1%ers or something. They're the top guys and their families that are running the whole show. So he throws this feast. And the purpose of the feast, this is important for us. Why would you throw a feast when your city is being attacked and surrounded by these forces? And you know that your father has been defeated in battle and was routed. That's where you just pell-mell throw down your weapons and run from the enemy. And his dad, with however many thousands of his soldiers, had fled to what is modern-day southern Iraq, south of Babylon, to save his own skin. And his son throws a feast. Well, it was political and religious theater is what this feast was. Okay, it was not a feast to have a good time with some friends, or to try out some good Oregon Pinot that somebody rode over across the sea, or something like that. You hate it when I say weird things like that, don't you? It was a feast, though, that had great drama and political connotations to it as to what he was doing. Okay, so the city was soon to be attacked, but he gathered together his people. I'll nail it down exactly why I believe he did in a minute here. But it says that they worshiped their gods of gold and silver, iron, bronze, stone, and wood. For these material items that they had around them. They worshipped their gods. Each of these elements would have a particular god. And of course, the gods provided them, in their mind, great wealth. That's the gold and the silver. A great military prowess and security. That's the iron and the bronze with all of the gates and the locks and the buckles and all. Once I thought about this when I was in the military and then as a paramedic, I thought, so much of my day-to-day work experience is dependent on buckles. If buckles started failing me now, whether it was jumping out of an airplane or seat belts or whatever, but these are items of strength. Well, they had doors with buckles that were huge. And they praised their gods for the iron and the metals that made them great and the weaponry that they were able to craft. They were an amazing military society. So they praised the gods of those things, of their defenses, and of wood and stone and clay. That's what their buildings were made out of. But even more than that, their idols were mostly sitting in their over 40 temples in this city, made out of clay and wood and whatnot. They basically, this was praising and thanking their gods for the security that they enjoyed. They had security because of their weaponry. They had security because of their great wealth in that Middle East, climate. They had security in their walls, which surrounded the whole city. It was about, I figure, 15 by 15 or so miles. The walls were maybe 12 feet thick, 30 feet high, and they had over 100 watchtowers that went higher than, of course, the walls. I think the watchtowers would go up to 100 feet high. So they were really lock solid and protected. They had food stored up that would last them for years. They could survive. And most important of anything, they had controlled the flow of the Euphrates River so that parts of it flowed through their city and much of it wrapped around the city as a moat. If you wanted to attack Babylon, you would cross the Euphrates River, which is impossible in that stage of warfare. They didn't have naval battles in the middle of the desert. So how would you cross it? So they were very proud and secure in themselves, their wealth, their walls, their food, and mostly the water, the Euphrates River. They could grow whatever they wanted. The ancient Babylonian Empire had an irrigation system from the Tigris and the Euphrates that made it absolutely rival the productivity of the United States in its big grain years when it really made the crops. All you need is water, and they channeled the water in a system of irrigation canals, lakes for flood control that was just an absolute ancient mark of genius. And then the Euphrates would gather itself together and protect their very city. It was impregnable. It could not fall. But still, they had a feast because Belshazzar needed to convince these 1,000 people that they were safe, that they should remain politically loyal to him and his father, that the defeat of his father was not means to despair. They should stay loyal for him. Don't make a deal with Cyrus. Don't make a deal with the Persians who are attacking us. Don't worry. Don't make the market crash, whatever. He had to convince them to stay loyal and to stay with him, to stay on his side, not to basically desert him during this time. So why the feast? Well, it was a political rally to strengthen people's political commitment to the Nebuchadnezzar clan and to Belshazzar. It was a propaganda spectacle displaying Babylon's favor with the gods. Go get the gold, the silver cups that my father stole from Jerusalem's temple and bring them in here. Folks, you're going to drink wine out of those cups. It'd be like if I went into anyway, I won't tell you what it'd be like, but it'd just be really inappropriate, okay? Really inappropriate. Don't worry, we weren't going to end up in the bathroom, but you know what I mean. It was a religious ritual in that religion was just saturated through with every public gathering. There would be probably a slaughter of an animal. There would be the invocation of blessing on the time by priests. These people functioned with religion that would make all of our heads spins. I mean, you think it's a little bit religious to start out a court session with a hand on the Bible or something? That's nothing. This was not really a theocracy, but it was riffed through with religion. So it was a religious ritual, this big meeting. It was psychological in that it was trying to help these people cope with what was happening to them and trusting. And then it was theologically, of course, it ends up being very ironical too. Well, what happened here is that Belshazzar desecrated something that was holy. He said, bring in the gold and the silver that were taken, that my father took from Jerusalem, from the temple. Nebuchadnezzar, in, I don't know how many years earlier, it was probably a good 60 years earlier or so, or more, he had destroyed Jerusalem and taken all of the gold and silver furnishings out of the temple. If you read through the Old Testament in the book of Exodus, in the book of Leviticus, you find all of these chapters of intricate instructions. And then you will hammer gold into these cups, and these cups will be this, and these silver will be that. And it just seems like, what is the point here? These were the creation of the holy utensils that were to be associated forever with only the worship of Yahweh, Adonai, the Jewish God. They were not to be used for anything else. Only those worship ceremonies of Israel. The temple didn't have any idols in it. That's the first thing Nebuchadnezzar would do, or any of these ancient kings, when you'd conquer a city and pull its temples to the ground or whatever. You would take the idols and you would take them home with you, and you would put those idols in your God's temple. The Philistines did that with the ark, and it's just, that's what you would do as a public demonstration to all of your people that your God, their God, is greater than this God of the Jews. Look, we went in and took what we wanted from his temple. Only there were no idols. So Nebuchadnezzar took the next best thing that he could get his hands on, this tremendous amount of wealth in gold and silver. Tremendous in that day and in this. It says in 2 Chronicles, Nebuchadnezzar also brought some of the articles of the house of the Lord to Babylon and put them in his temple in Babylon. It's like a museum display. In 2003, I traveled to Vietnam on a medical mission, and we went north and taught in Hanoi. And it was really fascinating because we had a day off, and I visited what was it called? I was trying to think of that this morning. The Museum of the Great Revolution or something like that. It had a name, something like that. And my friend and I, she's a nurse from LA, and we said, we got to go see that. And we went to visit this museum, and we had this Vietnamese girl who was a party member of the Communist Party and was entrusted with, we always had somebody with us, and we were Americans there, and she was giving us a tour. So we went into this museum. It was a museum celebrating the defeat of the United States of America in the Vietnam War. It was amazing. Yeah, exactly. That was my response too. Never seen anything like it. There's maps with tunnel systems. Here's the tunnels we dug that the Americans never found. Here's Highway 1, which was a tremendous clandestine secret tunnel that ran the whole length of the country to move troops and supplies during the war. And we kept trying to bomb it and destroy it, and we really never did. And that was boasted about. Here's how we went. And my guide kept going, and see what we did? And then we're going through the rest of it. Yeah, and you didn't find out. And kept going on. So she was kind of reliving the glory, I guess. And then there was, behind glass, the Nomex flight suit of an American pilot on display. Had his name, had his helmet. He was a guy that had been shot down as many of those pilots were, and survived, from what I understand. But they took his equipment, his survival equipment, his everything, his gun, everything, and put it behind glass, along with other items from his jet or helicopter that they had gotten when he was shot down. And they were celebrating the defeat and humiliation of the great American pilot. And he wasn't the only one. Different helmets of the pilots that they'd shot down. And that was shocking. I'd never been through anything like that. I didn't feel some kind of a right to go, wait a minute, sir, you have no right to make that museum. Well, it's their museum, it's their country. They did win, and we are out of there. So that's what they did. I don't know if they still have that museum. As we walked outside, though, there were pieces of aircraft that had been shot down, all damaged up from helicopters and jets and a couple of like tanks or tracked type vehicles that they had gotten in their war, and they were on display out in a courtyard that we're kind of looking at. And of course my friend and I were going, well, this is getting pretty weird, right? Well, they were war trophies. In America, we don't celebrate war like that. It's nice that we don't, or we're not supposed to anyway. But these were war trophies. Nebuchadnezzar would bring the war trophies home. Sometimes people in chains, sometimes people blinded, and then always items of silver and gold, any material wealth from the countries that he would conquer. And his war trophies from the Temple of Solomon, one of the ancient wonders of the world, right, are sitting in his temple there as examples of, here's what this God did for his people. I beat him. So he throws a feast, including that celebration, desecrating what is holy. It's his way of saying, don't worry, my friends, and don't worry about Cyrus. We beat this God. We'll beat whatever other ones are surrounding this city around us now. And the point isn't that they use them for alcohol. I heard too many sermons this week about, beloved, this is the danger of alcohol. Look where it led, and on and on. And I don't know what historical, era that came from, but it's not about that. It's about using them for anything other than the worship of God. They were wholly set apart to God, and they were being used to criticize, dismiss, and humiliate God. That's what the problem was. That's the problem with the feast. Well, as the story goes on, while Belshazzar partied in defiance, God himself entered the room. Verse 5, suddenly the fingers of a man's hand emerged and began writing opposite the lampstand on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace. And the king saw the back of the hand that did the writing. Then the king's face grew pale, and his thoughts alarmed him. His hip joints went slack, and his knees began knocking together. The king called aloud to bring the conjurers, the Chaldeans, and the diviners. The king spoke and said to his wise men of Babylon, any man who can read this inscription and explain its interpretation to me will be clothed in purple and have a necklace of gold around his neck and have authority as the third ruler of the kingdom. Then all the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the inscription or make known its interpretation to the king. Then King Belshazzar was greatly alarmed. His face grew even paler, and his nobles were perplexed. The queen entered the banquet hall because of the words of the king and his nobles, and the queen spoke and said, O king, live forever. Do not let your thoughts alarm you or your face be pale. There is a man in your kingdom in whom is a spirit of the holy gods. And in the days of your father, illumination, insight and wisdom like the wisdom of the gods were found in him. And King Nebuchadnezzar, your grandfather, Your grandfather, the king, appointed him chief of the magicians, conjurers, Chaldeans, and diviners. This was because an extraordinary spirit, knowledge and insight, interpretation of dreams, explanation of enigmas, and solving of difficult problems were found in this Daniel, whom the king named Belteshazzar. Let Daniel now be summoned, and he will declare the interpretation. You ever have that where you're doing something wrong and God shows up? And you're going, man, you were definitely not invited to this party. And here you are. So God shows up. There's fingers and a hand on the wall. It appears that maybe Belshazzar is the only guy that saw the hand and the fingers, and that he drew attention to it when he started freaking out with these words that appeared on the wall, and he was overcome with terror. It's narrative language, so it doesn't say he had a panic attack or something like that. It tells us his knees are knocking together. He could barely stand. He fell apart. He fell apart with this. And then despite the promise of great reward, nobody of all of these nobles and magicians and conjurers, and remember, this is not like somebody playing a magic game that's supposed to fix this problem. These are smart people. This is the class of learning that discerned by the stars that the Messiah had been born and traveled to find him in Bethlehem. Same group of people. These aren't any slouches, is what I'm saying. So despite promising these people great reward, third ruler of the kingdom, Belshazzar was number 2, his dad was number 1 and on the run, so third was his to give away. They couldn't give an answer. I think probably they didn't want to give an answer. It didn't look like a very positive. They certainly could read the words, but I don't think any of them wanted to give an answer because the news wasn't, as far as they could tell, it probably wasn't good news, and none of them wanted to venture that. But it says anyway, they just couldn't figure it out. They couldn't figure it out. So the queen, and that's probably either Nebuchadnezzar's widow or perhaps Belshazzar's wife, who would be, maybe his mom. She told him about Daniel. Daniel is about 85 years old now. He is doubtlessly retired and known, and he's probably certainly wealthy, rich guy living in Babylon, and he had a tremendous impact on that culture and all of the men, the people that he led. But now he's out of the game, and she remembers him. She remembered him for what he had done for Nebuchadnezzar. He was pretty much friends with Nebuchadnezzar. And it seemed that Daniel was always getting called in when the king was in trouble and figuring it out what was going on and informing the king, whether the king listened to him or not. Sadly, Daniel's not really remembered for his faith or his religion by these folks. He's remembered for his wisdom and his amazing skill at solving riddles. Call Daniel. So Daniel is called, and Daniel arrives and confronts the king. He refused his reward, but he had a lot more to say to him. Verse 13, Daniel was then brought before the king. The king spoke and said to Daniel, "Are you that Daniel who was one of the exiles from Judah, whom my father the king brought from Judah?" He's talking about Nebuchadnezzar. They call grandfathers fathers in this world here. "Now I've heard about you that a spirit of the gods is in you, and that illumination, insight, extraordinary wisdom has been found in you. Just now the wise men and the conjurers were brought in before me that they might read this inscription and make its interpretation known to me, but they could not declare the interpretation of the message. But I personally have heard about you, that you are able to give interpretations and solve difficult problems. Now, if you're able to read the inscription and make its interpretation known to me, you will be clothed with purple, wear a necklace of gold around your neck, and you'll have authority as the third ruler in the kingdom. That means clothed in purple, you'll be in the highest ruling class of royalty in the kingdom. You will have gold around your neck. You will be enriched and made wealthier probably than you already are. And you will have authority. You will have power in this kingdom. Daniel answered and said to the king, keep your gifts for yourself or give them to someone else. However, I will read the inscription to the king and make the interpretation known to him. Man, I don't know about you, but I would be really scared if Daniel said that to me. Keep your money, don't want it, but I'll tell you what, I'm going to tell you something. I will read the inscription. Well, the king had recalled Daniel's reputation, maybe tried to flatter him a little bit, offered him this reward that Daniel didn't want. It could very well be Daniel knew all of that would be worthless in a matter of hours. But nonetheless, Daniel said he would interpret it. Daniel might have been thinking at that time, at that moment, of the prophecies made about the Babylonian kingdom. It had been prophesied in Jeremiah. The nations will serve Nebuchadnezzar and his son and his grandson until the time of his own land comes. Many nations and great kings will make him, that grandson, their servant. You see, Daniel was a man who read his Bible. And he believed in Jeremiah the prophet, literally. And he expected during the reign of the grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, the end of the Babylonian kingdom. Doesn't mean the end of the exile, but the end of that dynasty of the Babylonians, of Nebuchadnezzar and them. So he might have had that in his mind, or remembered Isaiah. Fallen is Babylon, and all the images of her gods shattered on the ground. He knew the end was coming sometime soon. But he did start out agreeing to interpret, and he rebuked the king. O king, Most High God has granted sovereignty, grandeur, glory, and majesty to Nebuchadnezzar your father. Because of the grandeur which he bestowed on him, all peoples, all nations, all men of every language feared and trembled before him. Whoever he wished, he killed. Whoever he wished, he spared alive. And whoever he wished, he elevated. And whomever he wished, he humbled. But when his heart was lifted up, and his spirit became so proud that he behaved arrogantly, he was deposed from his royal throne, and his glory was taken away from him. He was driven away from mankind. His heart was made like that of beasts. His dwelling place was with the wild donkeys. He was given grass to eat like cattle, and his body was drenched with the dew of heaven until he recognized that the Most High God is ruler over the realm of mankind, and that he sets over it whomever he wishes. Belshazzar certainly knew all that, but Daniel wasn't done. Yet you, his son, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, even though you knew all this. But you have exalted yourself against the Lord of heaven, and they have brought the vessels of his house before you. And you and your nobles, your wives and your concubines have been drinking wine from them. And you have praised the gods of silver and gold and bronze and iron and wood and stone, which do not see or hear or understand. But the God in whose hand are your life breath and your ways, you have not glorified. You have disregarded the lessons of history, first of all, is what he's saying to him. You know what happened to your grandfather. Your whole family knows it. There's nothing new or strange about one member of a family having a religious conversion and the rest of the family thinking he's crazy or she's nuts, and that's Aunt so-and-so who was a real Bible thumper or whatever they might say. But it's certainly not unheard of in a family for someone in the family to have the hand of God touch them and reach them and their life be changed by it. And the rest of the family, you love them, of course, they're your family after all, but they don't get it. And surrounded by that opulence and by that wealth in Babylon, why would they? And they're just glad it's all over, that, running around like a wild donkey stuff, and want to move on with life. They knew this had happened. Belshazzar knew exactly what had happened to his grandfather. But instead of being humbled by the story, and this was a family story, this was a true story, Daniel was alive. This wasn't myth or fable. Instead of being humbled, he actually took it upon himself to gain his popularity and to keep it by mocking and belittling and dismissing the God of the Jews. It was too embarrassing for him to follow in the footsteps of his grandfather, worshiping this God amidst all of the dozens of other gods that all of the important people were worshiping. It was embarrassing, and he decided to get things back on track to worshiping the right gods of the culture. That's what got the Christians in trouble in the first couple hundred years of the Christian church. And the big problem wasn't that they were, inventing a religion that Jesus was risen or something like that. That was there. But the big problem was that the pagan temples were emptying. By the end of the 3rd century or so, they really weren't. Even when Rome became Christian, it didn't close the pagan temples. Nobody went there anymore. And that was an issue of great concern for the government of Rome. People weren't worshiping the religious values of Rome anymore. So why would Belshazzar adopt to Judaism? Wouldn't do it. And he considered it his enemy, and he lived and spoke against it. So he was rebuked by Daniel. And as if that wasn't enough, Daniel goes on and reveals the meaning of the writing on the wall. Your time is up. Let's skip ahead because I just did it for you. Your time is up. Then the hand, Daniel says in verse 24, this hand was sent from him, and this inscription was written out. Now this is the inscription that was written out. Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. This is the interpretation of the message. Mene, God has numbered your kingdom, Belshazzar, and he has put an end to it. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales, and you have been found deficient. Perez, your kingdom has been divided and given over to the Medes and the Persians. Upharsin is a plural of the word Perez. And Perez is a word play because it sounds like Persian. Even I know that, and I don't even know this stuff. And that's what he told Belshazzar. Your kingdom has been taken from you and will be given to the Medes and the Persians. Then Belshazzar gave orders, and they clothed Daniel with purple and put a necklace of gold around his neck and issued a proclamation concerning him that he now had authority as the 3rd ruler of the kingdom. He had to keep up appearances. Those 1,000 people were wondering what was going on. They had to see that Daniel had succeeded and that Daniel was being rewarded. All is well. The kingdom continues. We're fine. Even Daniel's admitting it here and working with me on this thing. Look at him in his purple and all of that. And Daniel doesn't cause a stink, but he got those rewards. I think is making a show for the people. Mene is repeated twice. It has a couple of meanings. It means the first thing is your kingdom is numbered. God had said the exile would be 70 years. But what I think Daniel's saying here is your kingdom has already been determined in its length by God. God knows how long your kingdom's going to last. And God has therefore, Mene, appointed it according to how he has figured out when it's going to end. In other words, God's not being surprised by what is happening tonight. It's all going along with the numbering that God's already done with your kingdom. Tekel, weighed. Your kingdom is judged. I think this is something more personal, really. Judged and found wanting. You failed when you're evaluated and judged by God. You failed the judgment. In Upharsin and Perez, your kingdom is now divided, and it will be given over to the Persians. The Persians were really the chief military group of that Mede-Persian invasion. So the kingdom will now be divided. You might remember a few chapters ago, Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and the dream of a statue, and it had a gold head, silver chest and arms, and brass, and it went on. Well, this is the chest and the arms, two entities, the Medes and the Persians. This is that kingdom. So the words written on the wall were fulfilled that very night. So Darius the Mede, that same night, verse 30, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was slain. So Darius the Mede received the kingdom at about the age of 62. That very, very night. Darius the Mede, by the way, that there's a little bit of, lack of clarity about that, because there's not a lot of record of a man named Darius the Mede, but it was a royal title that's applied to different people. And the thought is that Darius the Mede is actually the title worn by Cyrus, who quickly became the king of Babylon. Okay? So, but anyway, Darius this Mede, the Mede or Cyrus, or one of the generals, received this kingdom at the age of 62. Here's what happened that very same night. October 12th, 539 BC. A general named Ugbaru, under the command of Cyrus, had diverted the flow of the mighty Euphrates River into a nearby lake. Here's the deal. Euphrates, remember I told you, it was just a system of amazing irrigation canals. So I would imagine what happened as the forces moved south is they opened every canal gate that they came to drain the Euphrates. I'm not saying they drained it bone dry because it was a living, running river, but they diverted in every chance they had. It'd be like if the Klamath River, which gets too low because we take all the water out of it, it would be like purposefully opening every access to get water out of the main channel of the Euphrates River. Finally, when they got north of the city of Babylon, they had a huge diversion process, and they diverted the flow, as much of the flow of the Euphrates River, into a nearby lake that was designed to gather in the flood season and fill up with the extra water. So they got rid of the water of the Euphrates as much as they could, to where, as the Greek historians describe it, the troops entered the city knee-deep water, crossing the Euphrates River. They had to have some inside help because they also say, those historians, not an arrow was fired. The city fell without a fight. And that very night, Belshazzar was killed. And the thousands, the nobles that had gathered and feasted, they didn't even know the end was there until those beautiful palatial mansions they lived in were being bashed down by the armies of Cyrus. It's amazing. Well, this text today is more than just an old story, although it's a fascinating story. It's more than that. It's a mirror held up to us of this culture of ancient Babylon, a culture that worships material items, gold and silver, brass and iron and all of that. Whatever form they're in, we live in a culture that really exists to extract wealth from creation. And it's not just the United States, it's basically every culture. You could be sitting in a boardroom with the communist leadership of this country, or you could be sitting in the Situation room at the White House. You can be anywhere. But basically, all these governments and cultures, they exist to manage the resources and provide continued life and health for their culture. America lives that way too. Of course we do. We're material. And this holds a mirror up to us, because when the chips are down, what are they doing? They're worshiping their material wealth and their material things. They aren't worshiping chunks of clay. They're worshiping their religious system with the idols made out of the clay. They're not worshiping a thing of molten bronze or iron there. They're worshiping the gates and the towers and the things that their military had built by the strength of what they would say are their gods. Well, don't we do the same thing when the chips are down? Don't we immediately look to our resources, the resources of the world around us that can fix our problem and get us through? And thank the Lord, so many of the fixes are good. But don't we stop short of going to God because of the material things that we look for to save us in our life? Babylon always falls. Babylon, if there's one thing you should know about Babylon, it always falls. Babylon fell in the month of October, so many millennia ago. Babylon will fall in the future. The book of Revelation quotes the very scriptures at a point in time where the world finally does come together around its governmental system and its management, and its trade is growing, its merchants are growing, and Babylon falls suddenly at the return of Christ. And the text tells us in Revelation, fallen is Babylon the Great. Babylon did fall, and it will fall in the future, and Babylon falls today. It falls today. Think about it. All of the governments, all of the cultures that have their moment in the sun, and then they're gone. You know, those ancient Egyptians lasted for about 5,000 or 6,000 years, and they felt the way we feel about our culture. How could it ever end? We're so powerful. The Romans felt the same way. How could it ever end? The Greeks, the Medes, the Persians, the British Empire. The sun never sets on the British Empire. Gone. Babylon, human culture, human government, apart from God, always falls. You can't stop that. But what you can do is determine by the grace of God what kind of man or woman you want to be in Babylon. What Daniel did. That's what you have. You can determine whether you will live with the godliness, the piety of Daniel. Unimpressed with the trappings of the world, not clamoring after them, not selling your soul for these various gods, and not joining in the celebration of them. Digging in your heels and concerned mostly with the glory of God. Well aware of the history of God. Well aware of the history of God's people. And well aware of what happens to the governments and the great powers of the earth. Here today, gone tomorrow. Because Babylon always falls. You can be Daniel and live with that pattern on your life. You know, it's sad. I've seen this a lot, and maybe with Belshazzar this is true. You get to the end, and you simply have never followed God. You never wanted to. You've disdained him. You've known about him, but you wanted nothing to do with him because there was always more money to make, always some new plan to do, always some reason or another. And you think that maybe the day will come when you can see the end in sight. Your knees are shaking, your hips are wobbling, and you're petrified. And you think that you'll gather it together intellectually and spiritually to make a nice conversion to God. You're fooling yourself. You're throwing the dice. Maybe you will, and maybe you won't. How do you know your end won't come with the suddenness of a heart attack, of a myocardial infarction, a sudden stroke, something that debilitates you in such a way that you no longer have that ability? How do you know? How do you trust that your mind and your brain is always going to work so well that you will theologically jump ship at the right time? You don't know. Why would you think such a thing? You're the one gambling if you think keeping God out of your life is somehow going to extend it and be okay, and that you can just put on the life raft, put on the protection when the end comes. You can live like Belshazzar, a man who whistled through the graveyard. You know what that term is? It's a great one. It means you're scared, but you don't want to admit it, but you got to go that way. You've decided to go through the graveyard, and so you're like, don't step on graves, don't. You're whistling through the graveyard. You're scared and you're terrified, but you're choosing to go that way. That was Belshazzar. Concerned with his own glory, indifferent to history, and deciding to just get through life with the resources that he had on his own, and even taking the next step of dismissing God. Isn't it funny how human beings are this way? So few of us in history can ever win a battle and simply be happy that we won and get along well with the people we beat. Politically or civilization or socially or whatever. Why do we have to defeat the people we beat? Why do we have to own them? Why is it important to humiliate your ideological foe or the person who dared to disagree with you? Why is that important? The humiliation. It wasn't enough for Belshazzar that he was surrounded by the captured idols of the nations, that he had Israel's gold, he had Israel's silver. They won. Why wasn't that enough? The young man grew up to become an older man who lived in disdain of God himself. Why are we that way? Well, I'll leave that for you to think through, but at the end of the day, I just want to make this point, which I think is most important. There is a king coming today. He won't come from the north. Apparently, he comes from above us. But there is a king who is coming for his kingdom, and he will receive that kingdom. He will receive it without an arrow being fired. He will not fight for it. Jesus Christ is alive and is returning to the earth. He will not hold an election. There will not be a choice. Well, the Confederation of Asia has decided that they will maintain a good relationship with the Jewish king, but absolutely not. There is a king coming who is coming to judge, to assess, and to take the rule on this planet. Jesus said it himself. The Son of Man's going to come in the glory of his Father with the glory of his angels, and then he will repay every man according to his deeds. Later he said, when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit then on his glorious throne. The idea there is ruling the kingdom. There is a king coming today, the way there was that night with Belshazzar. You today prepare for the king by being a Daniel. You welcome him in your heart, in your own meager, stumbling ways as the best you can do. You live according to his kingdom to welcome him when he arrives. But make no mistake about it. The king is surrounding, and the king is definitely on his way. Gracious King, we bow our hearts to you this morning, and we praise you for your approach. We ask you that all of the trinkets and all of the materials, the wealth, the temptations, the thing that would threaten your loving rule over our lives would be ripped out of us by the roots. Take it. Take our love of power, our love of wealth, our love of control, our desire to always be on top. Take our pride and our arrogance, take it and throw it into the farthest parts of the sea, and leave us a people with only the desire to please you and you alone. We ask these things on the basis of your shed blood for our sins, Jesus Christ. In your name we pray, amen.